don't let me forget that. We won't do that. The last part of this is on the final. If you notice, right, I have, let's get my step backwards in this document. You'll notice that I put this gradient kind of background, right, to kind of give myself not, kind of a definitive, non-definitive edging of my, so it's not just this cropped square on a board and arbitrarily placed. It's like, it's blending the outside with the inside. So to do that effect, it's fairly simple, right? I define with my guides kind of where I want my cropping to be on my image first, and I'm gonna get everything down in my stack, and I'm gonna go layer, new layer. So I want just an empty container, so I do a new layer here, and I'm gonna call it gradient. And I don't want a new gradient layer. I want to make it so I can create the gradient myself. And I drag down where I want my cropping to be, because right, I don't want people seeing that I didn't finish drawing my beams. Right? I want to frame out my view now, right? Then what I'll do is, within that scope, is I'm going to start using my gradient tool based upon the edging of these items, right? So my gradient tool is below the eraser. An eraser obviously erases things. With my gradient layer selected, in the options bar, you're going to be presented with several different other gradients that weren't available to you in Illustrator. Polar array, I forget what this one's called. That should come up and give me a tooltip. Oh. Anyways, if you look close enough at it, it's like it's going to start, it's more pronounced on its polar, so it looks conical in section. Basically the linear one is usually your go-to for me. And then if I double click on that layer sample, it brings up some other kind of presets. When I want to make a new preset, I'm going to go ahead and click on new, and I'm going to call this Craig's white to clear, right? Or whatever you want to call it. And then how I change this, right? So I can do multiple colors by adding, by just clicking in the space, and then if I double click on that color, right, it's going to start giving me different gradients that way. And that's how these were created, these other colors. In this case, I'm just going to double click and take my custom one here. And in the event, I start with like the black and white one, because you're not going to have one made like I already do. How you do this is I double click here and I say I want you to be white, and then I double click down here, and then I'm going to say, oh well, wait a minute, that's not working, I need you to be transparent here. I should use transparency, so the top part, right, is transparency, and I'm going to say that I want you to be 0%. Right, so now I have white to clear. So I want the stuff that I want to keep is going to go to the clear side, and the things I want to blend in, and that's as assuming I know what the color of my page is. If I'm going to have a black page, right, I would then use a black versus a white, right? So then I can just drag and click. So then it starts to fade those things in there, right? And I use the guides to kind of, because you'll see, if I do too crazy, it starts to overlay on pieces I don't want, right? So the gradient tool is, if I do a sharp one, right, it does a sharp gradient. If I do a long broad stroke with it, right, it does a lighter gradient, okay? So, right, I want to start getting that edge filled in more, right? So I'd do like that. Whoops. And then I would do the long angular strokes with it. That's kind of how I approach it. Okay. And you want to make sure you're not like completely blowing out your image on it. And you want to make sure you get close to the example. It takes a little bit of finesse, right? It'll take you, I spend more time at the end of my images doing the gradient effect, because it's this hand motion, than I do with anything else. So, because it's unique for every image. And then the final, what I have gotten in the habit of doing, and this is leading into cutting things out and things like that, is I always leave the document as is, because it might come 2 months from now I need to do the same image again, right? So in the Photoshop file, I leave the guides, and then I just fill in the area that I'm going to tell the next person that comes in to do this image when I'm sick or whatever, that hey, I'm cutting out this area. That's where this image comes from. So it's always the same size in my other documents, because I'm going to link this in InDesign or wherever it may go. So to do that, it's the selection tool. So here's my direct select where I'm selecting layers. This is my marquee selection, right? And underneath the marquee selection, I have, you know, like elliptical, single pixel rows, single column rows. I'm going to do the rectangular one, and with snapping on. So remember, look, I turned my snapping off before. I need to turn that back on. So view, snap, and then view, snap to guides. So, and then I'm going to go ahead and now it'll snap to my guides. Now in the options bar, right, these buttons are going to allow you to either continue adding to the selection or subtract. So if I wanted to subtract a portion of that selection, I could do so. Or if I want to re-add it, I can just select everything. It's going to add it again. I want that side, and I want that side. And then I go layer, new fill layer, solid color, and that is going to be black. And that way, now it's framed, right? So whenever, and then I would save out my Photoshop image, and then whenever I came in to edit it, all I needed to do is when I'm done, I crop it to where I want the JPEG to be, right? And I file save as, and then I just, before I resave it, I undo it, and then that's where my file stays.